Chapter 29, Act 29, The Summoner's Tale. Act 29, The Summoner's Tale. The Gathering.
Here's the map,
Luca exclaimed, waving a roll of parchment that was nearly as tall as she.
Anyone want to help me tack it up to the wall?
Zangetsu and the man in black, the tallest among them, each took a side of the map after Luca uncoiled it and a nail from her outstretched hand. She retrieved her hammer from her tool belt, and Zangetsu taking it from her first. Rydia was sitting on the edge of a bed in front of them, her chin cradled against her hand. Sitting next to her on the surrounding beds were Edge, Izayoi, Tsukinao and Gekao. They had all moved down to the rather impressive stateroom housed in the Falcon's hull. Luca had installed several beds and other living arrangements to make life on the ship more comfortable for the dwarves that would use it for long patrols or journeys across the underworld to Tomra or Kokel's smithy when the dwarven army would need to haul batches of supplies and weapons. It was roomy enough that everyone present could sleep with at least one empty bed between them, an appealing concept after the 8 of them being jammed into Joanna's kitchen for their impromptu State of the Union. Once they were done hanging up the map, Luca retrieved yet more nails from the pouch on her hip, turning to Rydia.
So, our objective is to find all the Eidolons, right? And then you just need to tell them what's up and they'll join you again. Well, more or less, I suppose.
Rydia crossed her arms over her chest.
I don't quite understand how I am to do it. But the mist, my mother, said it could be done. So I guess I'll just have to take a leap of faith and do whatever my heart tells me when the time comes. And then you can use the Eidolons' power to overpower the barrier protecting the castle.
Tsukinawa grinned.
Right.
Rydia smiled slightly. Of course, the really hard part came after that. They would have to confront Cecil, and would finally learn why Baron was gathering the crystals. Rydia desperately wished her mother had given her some sort of clue about what to do about that when the time came. Was there anyone on the planet who had any idea what Cecil might be thinking? If it came down to it, would she really be able to fight the man who had changed the course of her life? And if Rosa, Theodore, and Sid are involved as well? Her stomach twisted into itself just thinking about it. Edge searched her worriedly as Gekao flopped back onto his bed, crossing his leg over one knee.
So where do we think the Eidolons are?
Gekao asked.
Can they only manifest when the mysterious girl calls upon them? She summoned Ifrit to chase after us in the Tower of Babel. Ifrit?
Rydia swallowed a sob, clutching crisp taupe sheets in her sweaty palm.
Him too. We have to assume all of the Eidolons are under her control,
Golbez said firmly, though not unkindly. He glared at the map behind him, holding out the hammer.
Luca, mark the Evelyn region for Ifrit. Got it,
Luca said, and proceeded to bang a nail in the space between the Tower of Babel and Evelyn Castle.
Normally, Eidolons only walk our plane when they have been summoned,
Rydia finally offered as a reply to Gekao's inquiry, having pulled herself together enough to speak. She was painfully aware of the 7 pairs of eyes that were trained on her now, looking to her for their next move. It was a feeling she wasn't used to. She had always relied on Cecil, and to a lesser extent, Edge, to lead them to their battles, the grown-ups, according to her time-warped mind. But things are different now. I can't let the impostor beat me. If I give in to sorrow, it will mean she has already won.
However, that's not to say that they can't come and go as they please. Titan would frequently visit me as a child even though I didn't properly call upon him. And if they are summoned, they can remain on the plane until they are dismissed or incapacitated.
She heard another nail striking into the wall, and looked up to see Luca hammering in the Agard region. Rydia raised her eyebrows. The man in black turned to meet her stare.
Titan only faded away when I parried his attack. I made the effort not to fatally wound him. He could still be wandering the region. The girl was nowhere to be seen while we were there, right? She might have summoned him long ago and left to gather the rest of the crystals. You're right,
Rydia nodded, her voice quivering as she pulled her knees against her chest. He tried not to hurt Titan on purpose? To the untrained eye, Titan has the appearance of any other monster. Did he know Titan was an Eidolon when he saved me? How?
If I may make an observation.
Zangetsu stroked the wisp of his goatee, slowly making his way down the length of the map.
Perhaps the mysterious girl planted the Eidolons in various regions as a security measure. Both the Tower of Babel and Agard are valuable gateways, one to the interdimensional elevator, and the other to the underworld, the domain of 4 of our 8 crystals. That's a good point,
Izayoi said.
It wouldn't be too outrageous to assume that she had eidolons planted near the surface world crystals as well, right? That means Mysidia, Troya, Damsion, and Fabul go on the list as well.
Edge gave a hopeful smile.
But our comrades there would not let the crystals fall into enemy hands so easily, maybe there's a chance they are still fighting her off. If she's using eidolons as her guard dogs, I would not be so sure,
Rydia said quietly, recalling the devastation Titan had managed to wreak in just the small amount of time Rydia and Luca had been trying to placate him.
If our theory is correct, then with every second that passes, our friends will only be in greater danger. So where to first?
Luca asked. She had planted nails over the cities of Mysidia, Troya, Damsion, and Fabul, stuffing the remaining ones back in her pouch.
If our friends are fighting, we need to help them as soon as possible. Can we go to Mysidia?
Tsukinawa suddenly burst out, leaping up from where he was sitting next to his Aoi.
The elder had sent Lady Porum to mount ordeals. If both she and Palom are gone, there may not be anyone there who can defend Mysidia if an eidolon is there.
He lowered his head, knotting his fingers together anxiously. All evidence of his normal, cheerful demeanor had been wiped off his face.
I guess I'm more worried than I thought.
Oh, of course. The girl he likes lives there. Rydia pressed her fingers to her lips. Even though he's one of Edge's elite soldiers, he's still just a child. He and Theodore must be terrified right now. The more she thought about it, the more intensely her blood began to boil. Why had she fought so fiercely in the war if more innocent children were just going to be dragged into devastation once more? I won't let Tsukinawa, or anyone else, lose their loved ones to the madness of war ever again. Rydia rose to her feet.
Luca, set a course for Mysidia. Aye.
Luca nodded, turning to rush up the stairs that would take her to the upper deck. Tsukinawa suddenly threw his arms around Rydia, the force of his hug knocking her back down into the bed.
Ack.
Rydia squealed, and Tsukinawa sniffled against her chest, on the verge of bawling.
Thank you so much, Miss Rydia. Hey.
Edge reddened, lifting Tsukinawa by his cowl and dangling him above the floor.
That's not cute at your age. It's okay.
Rydia laughed nervously, flopping the rest of the way back against the bed and closing her eyes.
On second thought, I think I may just stay down here and try to get a little sleep until we land. Do you want company?
Edge asked a little too eagerly, to which Rydia responded by planting her boot firmly in his thigh, spiked heel first. Edge stumbled backward, a string of curses erupting like a volcano as he dropped Tsukinawa to the floor in a squirming heap. Izayoi and Gekao giggled silently behind him, while Zangetsu and Golbez averted their gaze, both pretending to suddenly be fascinated by the map before them.
No thank you.
Luca zipped up her shop romper, shivering as the first fat drop of rain hit her cheek, followed quickly by another, and another, until a procession of showers swept over the Falcon's deck. Glancing behind her, she saw that Tsukinawa and Izayoi were descending below in quite a hurry. They and the man in black had been the only ones to eventually follow her upstairs when she left to prepare for their flight to Mysidia. Kalka and Brina had fled downstairs as well. Their programmed protocol that acted as their instinct told them not to get wet so that Luca didn't have to worry about them getting fried. The closer they had gotten to their destination, the darker it had gotten. A look through Luca's scope confirmed that a nasty storm front was hanging over the Mysidia continent. Although it didn't appear to be moving in any direction, it was as if it were anchored to that one spot, even though the winds were gusting so powerfully that Luca could feel the Falcon being sped along. If they had not wanted to go to Mysidia, they would have had a hell of a time trying to ride out of this storm. Perhaps the gods were on their side, for once. She heard a soft click, and turned to see the man in black next to her, collapsing the scope in his hands. His silver hair was whipping back in the windstorm like a kingdom standard in the middle of a battlefield, a distant strike of lightning illuminating the trails of water the rain left on his skin as it slammed into his chest and legs. He was getting soaked to the bone, and while she wholeheartedly appreciated the view, she thought it was perhaps a bit rude to use her standing as a princess to keep him around just for decorum's sake. He seemed like the type of guy who was into the whole chivalry thing, but only when he wasn't talking. Whenever he did deign to speak, nothing courtly ever seemed to actually come out, and the illusion was shattered.
You don't have to stay out here,
Luca offered.
I've flown in much worse before, I'll be okay on my own. I had no concerns about that. It's just that I have no business downstairs.
The man in black replied bluntly, and Luca inwardly groaned. Bye-bye. fantasy of making Palom jealous. He arched his brow at the strange look on her face, and she quickly turned her attentions back to flying.
Do you find it odd that the storm is not moving? Yeah.
Luca dragged her sleeve across her goggles to clear away the fog.
I'm kinda thinking this isn't a normal storm. As well.
He crossed his arms, fixing his stare at the shadow of the Tower of Prayer that was starting to slowly flicker into view. Luca watched as another slash of lightning tore through the sky, her heart involuntarily leaping into her throat as she saw a mote of haunting violet light illuminate in the man's eyes. There is something about this man that is just so familiar. At first, Rydia and I were afraid of him, yet we didn't refuse his offer to escort us to the Tower of Babel. I know she felt it too, the irresistible allure of the nostalgia you get when you reunite with an old friend or lover. So powerful that you forget everything terrible that drove you apart in the first place. But this man has never been a friend of either of ours, I know that much for certain. And yet... She watched out of the corner of her eye as the man approached the bow of the ship, another violent gust of wind making his cape crack against the sky. He peered up at the twin moon, hanging heavier in the sky than ever, twilight flooding his gaze as his fingers clutched the falcon's railing. A thin haze of mist was dancing over his skin, giving him an ethereal aura thanks to the moon's failing light. Such mournful eyes. I swear, it's as if Cecil's ghost is standing before me. She shuddered, reaching up to wipe her goggles again. When she blinked, the man was back to his normal coloring, still staring up at the moon. What the hell am I thinking? Cecil isn't dead. Luca took her time making the falcon's descent. Thanks to the storm and the premature darkness permeating the land, it was difficult for her to suss out a landing place that wasn't riddled with meteorite pockmarks. The man in black offered his assistance by being her eyes in the pockets of dusk that she could no longer see, and eventually, the ship was lowered to the ground with a series of protesting groans and crunching gears. This served as the call for all hands on deck, and the others, with the exception of the dolls, surfaced a few minutes later. Rydia was sleepily rubbing her eyes as she staggered up last, a squall of rain smacking her in the face as soon as she stepped through the threshold.
It's storming.
Rydia blinked as she lowered her hands and gazed up at the bruised sky.
Did I seriously sleep through all this? You were out like a light.
Edge shook his head.
I don't think you would have woken up if we had crashed. Not funny.
Rydia and Luca barked at the same time, remembering their last emergency landing in Agart after being chased by the Red Wings. Edge held up his hands, taking a step back.
We'll guard the ship while you investigate,
Gekau said. It was obvious to all that Gekau was including the rest of the Eblin 4 in his declaration. Rydia whirled around to face him, shaking her head.
In a storm like this? Do you really think that's a good idea? All the more reason, Miss Rydia.
Zangetsu bowed his head slightly.
If something should happen where you need to escape, we'll be prepared to depart. If the crystal is there, we'll want to secure it as quickly as possible, yes.
Tsukinawa stepped forward, but then paused when Gekau tilted his head ever so slightly, and looked down at his feet instead.
I wish you good luck. He can't come with us.
Rydia blinked.
He's clearly worried about his friend.
Gekau shook his head.
I need him here with me. Don't worry, I assure you Tsukinawa understands.
Edge. Rydia turned her pleading glance upon him, which would have almost been enough for him to entirely revoke the order he had given Gekau earlier back in Baron, and while she was at it, she could have probably also requested that he run a lap around the village naked with a lightning rod in hand and gotten an enthusiastic yes. But when he spotted the man in black waiting for them at the ramp, staring daggers at the skies above, he suddenly remembered that they were not exactly among friends, and for all they knew, could be in very close proximity to a crystal. Who knew how their new companion would react if it was revealed to be theirs for the taking?
Gekau is the boss,
Edge shrugged, and Rydia gave up, shooting Tsukinawa an apologetic look as she turned to follow the man in black and Luca off the ship. Edge took up the rear, silently thanking Gekau for keeping his promise as he tugged his cowl back up over his face. Behind him, he could hear the ramp lifting away from the ground as they plunged into the meadowlands.
We'll make our way for the Tower of Prayer immediately,
Rydia explained.
And ask the Elder to brief us about why he sent Porum to Mount Ordeals. He must have been desperate to send her on such a risky mission. Tsukinawa told me something interesting when we were scaling the Tower of Babel,
Edge said.
Supposedly, the Elder was trying to hunt down Kane Highwind. I wonder if that's where they thought he could be found.
Edge nearly smacked into Rydia in the middle of talking. She had stopped so abruptly. She spun around, her eyes wide and questioning. Luca and the man in black hesitated for a moment, but decided to keep going ahead.
Kane? He's alive. I don't know.
Edge blinked.
I wasn't there, remember? But that is an awfully specific name. I doubt Tsukinawa heard it incorrectly. He wouldn't even know who that man was to infer if the Elder had been talking about someone else.
Rydia shook her head, her hair now so sodden that it didn't move from where it was plastered against her head and chest.
Does Cecil know? He couldn't possibly. He'd be by Kane's side in a second if he had any idea. Maybe the Elder wanted to seek out Kane specifically to talk to Cecil.
Edge lowered his gaze.
Perhaps he suspects. No.
Rydia cried, pressing 2 fingers to Edge's mouth. He glanced up at her with a half-smile and she withdrew them, her cheeks on fire.
I am sorry. I can't bear the thought of. Ahhhhhhh.
Edge and Rydia spun around toward the entrance of the village. The most definitely female scream had erupted from there over the bellow of the winds, and Luca and the man in black were no longer in their sights.
Luca!
Rydia gasped, taking off into a run. Edge withdrew his dagger, dashing past her and bursting through the village gates. It didn't take long for him to spot Luca in the gloom-filled, flooded streets. Her bubblegum pink romper was the only burst of color in the ashen and mud-streaked boulevard in which she was standing. She was hovering over a still body, screaming her lungs off for someone to come and help. Edge ran to her side, panting as he slid to a stop on a patch of slick grass that was streaked with rain, and something much darker that he could only imagine was leaking from the body before them. It was a white mage, her eyes screwed shut and her mouth contorted in a painful grimace. Her hood was thrown back, exposing tendrils of choppy black hair to the mud and rain, and her hand was tightly clasped over her stomach. Her breathing was shallow enough that Edge could still make out she was alive, but just barely.
What happened?
Edge cried, and Luca shook her head.
I don't know. We just came in and I found her like this. Where is he?
Luca didn't have to ask who Edge was talking about. She pointed further up the street, where the man in black was kneeling over another body, his back to the two of them. Edge growled in his throat, and Luca grabbed his arm, biting her lip.
Hey. He didn't do anything. Calm down. Edge, Luca.
Rydia cried, running up to them.
What's going on? Everywhere I look, there's...
She trailed off, her words slurring into a low wail. The man in black joined the 3 of them moments later, shaking his head.
He's dead.
He gestured toward the body he had been tending to, which now had a black mage's traditional straw hat pulled down over the face.
And it looks like there are plenty more like him. What the hell happened here?
Edge muttered, kneeling down as he placed a palm over the ailing girl's chest, his index and middle fingers pressed into her sternum. His fingertips began to glow a pale blue as he muttered an incantation, infusing the white mage with pulsing light. When he lifted his hand, she let out a groan, her head lolling to the side.
This is the best I can do,
Edge said softly, hoisting her up over his shoulder.
Ninjutsu healing magic doesn't hold a candle to what a white mage can do, but it should keep her alive for now.
Rydia, Luca, and the man in black watched as Edge hauled her over to a nearby weapon shop. He first tried the door, which was locked. Glowering, he rounded a corner and lowered her into a semi-sheltered alley. Swallowing back her tears, Rydia ran across the street to what appeared to be an inn, yanking on the door with all her strength and banging upon it when it became evident that it would not give.
Please, open up. We need help. It's just like mist,
Luca whimpered.
But there's obviously been a battle here. Are we too late?
After a few moments, Rydia gave up on the inn, dejectedly returning to the group. The 4 of them proceeded north toward the looming Tower of Prayer, which had no sign of light or life reflected from within. All of the windows were darkened and slammed shut. Another flash of lightning exploded when they reached the tower's courtyard, illuminating a devastating mess of yet more fallen mages, half buried in scorched flower beds and overturned, shattered cobblestones that left gaping holes in the walkway.
Palom. Porum. Elder.
Luca began to scream as she ran for the tower doors. Edge and the man in black checked each body's vitals, and Rydia drifted through the carnage like a ghost, her eyes stinging with unspilled tears. Just as she stumbled over the crumbling top step of the tower entrance, a tremendous thunderclap exploded above, sending the entire village into a fit of tremors. Rydia screamed as the rest of the step collapsed beneath her feet from the quake, sending her crashing face first into a darkened puddle that tasted like dirt and something disturbingly brackish as the water was forced down her throat. Gasping for air as she simultaneously tried to force herself to throw up the disgusting taste burning in her mouth, she pushed herself up by her arms, her vision fuzzy as she tried to focus on the pool of black before her. Her left knee felt like it had been replaced by a rapidly filling water balloon. She wasn't ready to try to get up quite yet.
Rydia!
The man in black yelled from above.
Are you okay?
Rydia groaned as she spit up a mouthful of vomit, her head spinning from the fresh rush of defilement on her tongue. She watched as the puddle she had fallen into began to ripple delicately, and heard the footsteps approaching just before the gleam of a platinum-coated, ruby-topped staff appeared in the reflection of the water.
No.
Rydia moaned, her head collapsing in her arms as she whimpered to herself.
Not you, too. I didn't want to believe she had truly taken all of you. What?
Edge and Luca called from above. She heard pounding footsteps approaching from behind, and opened her eyes one last time only to be blinded by the violet-white light that crashed down all around her, her ears throbbing with the deafening roar. She threw her head back, screaming over the lightning until her throat was bloodied and raw.
Ramo, stop this!
A pair of arms lifted her from the ground and she felt herself soaring through the curtain of light, her soaked clothes and hair protecting her from the singeing sparks emanating over her like the mists of a waterfall. When she dared to open her eyes, she found herself being lowered to the ground by the man in black, who had his sword cocked in one hand.
Still alive?
He grunted, and she nodded. A piercing whistle shot past her ear, and she watched as a pair of shuriken lodged themselves into Rama's snowy beard and ivory robes, sending the old man reeling back a few feet as a riot of red began to erupt over his chest.
Rydia!
Edge leapt to her side from the courtyard above, grasping her shoulders.
The Tower of Prayer is locked, Luca is trying to pick it so we can escape. We need to buy her some time. What do we need to do to save Ramo?
Rydia's gaze flickered from Edge to Ramo, who was using his staff as a crutch while plucking the meddlesome shuriken from his chest. The man in black was shielding them, the curve of his ebony blade catching in the dying embers of the lightning storm as he pointed it toward the throat of the approaching thunder god. She lowered her eyes, slumping under Edge's hands.
I don't know. I can't bring myself to hurt him, no matter how much he hurts us. HRGH!
The man in black moaned as he met Rama's staff with his blade, pressing forward with his feet sinking into the mud from the effort.
His lightning storms must be what got the villagers. The entire storm on the continent is his doing, and that's why it's not moving like a normal weather pattern. If he hits us directly, we're not going to survive it. I know that.
Rydia cried, wincing as the man threw Rama off and sent him careening into the brick wall that guarded the Tower of Prayer. He sank down into a stunned pile of hair and robes, his eyes flashing red as he slowly fixed his glare upon them. Another peal of thunder rolled across the sky, and Rydia felt her stomach sink as a swirling magenta maelstrom began to twist into formation in the skies above, pulsing with flashes of distant lightning.
But we can't kill him, either.
She yanked away from Edge, forcing her legs to run as hard as she could manage toward the Eidolon, even as her lungs felt like they were about to explode out of her chest.
Rydia!
Edge screamed.
Wait!
Rydia collapsed to her knees before Ramo, clutching his gnarled hand in her own as she raised her eyes to his.
Ramo, please! You have to remember me.
She bit her lip as she ran her fingers over the glistening petersite stones that made up the stacks of rings on his hand. She knew that the storms Ramo was infamous for breeding that acted as the womb for his ultimate judgment bolt were born from these tempest stones.
I know you well.
Ramo responded by lifting his staff and smashing it against Rydia's head. She shrieked as she fell over, stars exploding in her eyes as she felt the first trails of warm blood run down her temple and soak into her hair. She could see the new storm opening above them growing larger and larger, crackling electricity was dancing in the air, making her muscles twitch with fearful anticipation as her body ignored her mind's urges to get back up and flee. Golbez watched as Rydia slumped to the ground, grinding his teeth. He was playing a dangerous waiting game. He didn't want a repeat performance of what had happened to Ashura and Leviathan on the moon, but he knew Rydia was in terrible danger. The storm forming above her would burst to life at any moment. He could only pray that he would get to her in time if that's what it came down to.
Rydia!
Edge panted as he caught up to the man in black, pressing his hands to his knees as he gulped air and glared at him out of the corner of his eye.
Why are you just standing there? Because he knows I'm a threat. He can smell the blood of his brethren on my blade. One false move and I'll seal Rydia's fate. You would be wise to let her try things her way first. Her way is going to get her killed,
Edge spat.
Can you live with that?
Golbez turned away, sheathing his sword. Do I have to choose which body to add to the already lengthy list I do have to live with? Another Eidolon or another human? Can we really not save both? Rydia moaned as she raised herself from the ground, hearing a soft pleading as she lifted her head. Her hyacinth hairpin had loosened from her hair and had fallen to the broken walkway. Another snarl of thunder washed over them, causing the cluster of rubies to vibrate airily as she scooped the hairpin back into her hands, turning back to Ramu.
You are kind and gentle,
Rydia whispered, scooting forward as the increasing spill of blood from her head obscured the sight in her right eye. Ramu slammed his staff down dangerously close to her thigh, the violet light of his storm saturating her form. She winced as she lifted the hyacinth back to her hair, her fingers shaking so badly that she couldn't steady them long enough to fasten the clasp. A warning bolt of lightning exploded behind her, the piercing light reflecting off the hyacinth and flashing in Rama's eyes. The thunder god let out a high-pitched shriek, dropping his staff and covering his face as he cowered back against the garden wall.
What the?
Edge blinked.
What just happened? The light from her hair ornament disoriented him.
Golbez frowned. Edge stood there, gaping, and Golbez gave him a hard shove.
If you're going to save her, do it now, you fool. Right.
Edge nodded, stumbling forward under the man in black's strength. Rydia was staring at Ramu, dumbstruck, her hands frozen in place as the red reflection of the hyacinth danced over Rama's contorted face. Edge slid in behind her, grabbing her arms.
Come on Rydia, time to go. No, wait.
Rydia gasped, handing the hyacinth to Edge and throwing herself onto Ramu. She tugged down his hands insistently, digging her fingers into his tissue paper-thin cheeks and forcing him to look at her. The red glare in his eyes had faded and his eyelids were fluttering rapidly in confusion.
Dia.
Ramu wheezed, and Rydia screamed in delight, pressing her lips to his forehead and bursting into tears.
You're awake. Praise the gods, you've returned to me. Indeed I have,
Ramu groaned, and with a snap of his fingers, the storm threatening to burst over them dissipated into nothingness, easy as that.
Are you all right, my child? I will be,
Rydia smiled, pulling away.
As soon as I find the others, I will be whole again. And I will be at your beck and call, should you need aid in doing so.
Ramu bowed his head, bursting into a glittering cloud of green and yellow crystalline light. Rydia slumped to the ground, laughing happily as she swiped the blood out of her eyes and reveled in the warm light coating her skin. I did it, Mommy. I saved Ramu.
You were amazing,
Edge said softly, and Rydia spun around to face him. He was holding out her hairpin, a drop of rain sliding down one of the ruby petals toward the crystal inlaid core. Rydia took it from him, turning it in her fingers and shaking her head in amazement.
Something about that light woke him up. It was nothing short of a miracle.
She looked up at Edge, hope lit in her eyes.
Maybe this is the key to waking up the others as well. Who gave you that?
The man in black asked, slowly approaching them. Rydia slid the hairpin back into her hair, clicking the fasteners shut.
The Queen of the Eidolons, Azura. Long ago, when I first came to the Feymarch during the war.
Rydia closed her eyes, letting out a shaky sigh.
She never indicated that it had any special powers though, I thought it was just a pretty trinket she wanted me to have. Rubies are supposed to symbolize deep love and courage,
the man in black said.
It's also used to banish nightmares. Perhaps that's why she wanted you to have it.
Rydia slowly opened her eyes, her heart pounding as she took in the man's words. She recalled the last time she had seen Azura alive, only days ago, but what now felt like a lifetime. Azura had offered one of her knowing smiles, pressing her fingers over left temple as she did so. Rydia had unconsciously mimicked her, remembering the cold caress of the ruby beneath her fingertips as Azura had given her final decree.
There is nothing to fear.
Rydia felt the tears spill once more, biting down on her lip.
I had no idea.
Azura. You knew what was to come. And still, you had faith in me until the very end. You didn't hate me at all, did you? The man in black looked uncomfortable at this sudden deviation in mood, and spun on his heel.
I'm going to see about the progress Luca has made with the tower.
Rydia looked to Edge, wiping her eyes as the man in black made his getaway.
So now that we know what to do, the rest of these should be pretty easy, right?
Edge smiled, and Rydia giggled despite herself.
Yeah, totally,
she tilted her head, smiling back.
Thanks for having enough faith in me to let me try things my way first. I'm aware that it was totally reckless and foolish on my part.
Edge shrugged, blushing and turning away.
You probably should save your thanks for him.
He nodded toward the black cape that was disappearing back up the stairs toward the tower.
He kind of talked me off the ledge. Oh.
Rydia blinked.
Does that mean you trust him now? No, not at all.
Edge barked, waggling his finger.
He still knows way too much that he's not telling us. How can you possibly want to keep on going with this charade? For the same reason that I didn't ask Cecil to leave your shady behind in the cave of Eblin when we found you planted in the ground by Ruby Kent.
Rydia frowned. Edge stared at her dumbly, and she threw her hands up in the air.
Because of what I felt in my heart. Because I just had a feeling that our meeting wasn't by chance, okay? Do I have to spell it out?
Yes, Edge nodded seriously, and Rydia rolled her eyes, stomping away in lieu of replying. He's such an idiot.
Rydia!
Luca exclaimed, waving her hand giddily.
We're ready to break into the tower. Please don't say it like that,
Rydia groaned, taking the latch of the door into her hand.
We're probably going to have a dozen staves and rods pointed in our direction when we enter, so just be cool, okay? I'm always cool,
Luca pouted.
I mean, my cheating, bastard boyfriend could be in here right now, and I'm not even breaking a sweat about it. Yeah, you're really convincing me,
Rydia sighed, tugging the door open.
And don't think I didn't notice you said boyfriend. We're having a serious talk later.
The four of them were greeted by total darkness, not even a single candle was flickering in the sconces that lined the entryway. Rydia took a few hesitant steps forward, noticing that both the classrooms and the bedrooms on either side of her were totally abandoned.
Hello? Is anyone here? Ramu is gone. It's safe to come out now. Let's check the crystal chamber,
Edge said, and Rydia nodded. No one had replied to her plea. They climbed the stairs that took them to the next level of the tower, and the crystal chamber. Rydia once again took the lead, pushing the door open and nearly falling over in shock. Porum was standing atop the crystal dais, clutching a winged mithril staff with one bandaged, bloodied hand, the other caked in streaked mud and bruises. Her pink hair was half hanging out of her ponytail, purple circles embossed beneath her wary, bloodshot eyes as she took in the new visitors.
Porum!
Rydia cried.
Are you okay? Rydia!
Porum smiled slightly, her legs bowing.
Thank heavens!
And with that, she collapsed over the dais, her staff bouncing down the stairs and sliding to a stop at Rydia's feet. Rydia kneeled down, shakily picking it up as Edge and Luca raced for the dais. There had been no shining curtain of light revealed when Porum had fallen. It was evident that the crystal of water was long gone. Porum. Izayoi pressed her crimson lips together in concentration as she finished the last of the wrapping around Porum's pinky, applying a small bead of adhesive Luca had fetched for her from the ship's first aid kit. She then took Porum's hand and gently laid it over the girl's stomach, giving it a final pat.
There. As long as you don't fuss with it too much, my heal salve spell will have this mended in no time. It's important that you let the bandage keep it in place though, you want the bone to set properly. Thanks.
Porum's eyes fluttered open, and she grimaced as she tried to sit up. Rydia leaned over, propping another pillow behind Porum's neck before she had to ask. The white mage smiled gratefully, a blush crawling over her cheeks.
I don't know how long I would have been able to keep going if you guys hadn't have shown up.
Rydia sat back, shaking her head.
It's a miracle we didn't find you in worse condition. I can't believe the Elder carried you all the way back to the tower on his own, too. You Mysidians are resilient, that's for sure.
Porum sighed.
No, it's just that he's a madman. I thought for sure he was gone after Rayma's first attack, the last thing I remember is passing out on top of him in the street. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the crystal chamber, and one of the other mages told me the elder had sealed himself at the top of the tower to fend off Ramo. Everyone in town who hadn't been struck down in the first wave of attacks had evacuated to the tower. Which explains why the door was locked shut,
Edge said, and Porum nodded.
Are you sure it's not a burden, keeping me on the falcon like this? The elder seemed a little too insistent on you taking me along. I think he doesn't want me to see how injured he truly is. He really went too far, this time.
She swiped away a tear, shivering.
He looked so small and frail in his bed. Why doesn't he want me around to take care of him? You're not a burden,
Rydia frowned.
Not to us, nor the elder. There isn't a single free bed in the Tower of Prayer right now. How are you going to take care of yourself if you don't have a place to lay your head? He knows you would go crazy if you were trapped in that tower, unable to help yourself or the villagers who got hurt. You want to be here, don't you? He gave the order so that you didn't have to ask.
Porum sniffled, her bangs flopping in her eyes.
I guess you're right. And I do want to be here, with you guys, more than anything. Megan, the white mage leading the charge in the elder's care, she is truly one of the best. She'll make sure he's okay.
Luca had been impatiently hovering around Porum waiting for her turn to speak, and she finally struck when there was a brief break in Porum's lamentations.
Where is Porum?
Porum looked up at Luca, shaking her head.
He went to Troya, but I don't know anything more than that. I haven't seen or heard from him in a month.
She stared down at the half-melted, tarnished star rings that she had been clutching in her hand. Aoi had needed to cut them off of her finger when it came time to tend to her wounds, but Porum wouldn't let her throw them away.
Unfortunately, I fear for the worst. I had a very auspicious feeling before I lost consciousness.
Rydia raised an eyebrow.
We saw him from the Falcon just a few days ago. He was riding on a black chocobo. Troya,
Edge muttered, glancing up at the map hanging behind them. Porum's eyes lit up.
Really? So maybe he's okay after all.
Golbez cleared his throat. He hated to crash what sounded like a minor celebratory moment, but they were still technically dealing with a catastrophe here.
What of the water crystal?
Porum lowered her gaze, closing her fingers over the rings once more.
It's been taken. Cain fled to Baron with it after I found him on Mount Ordeals. Cain did what?
Edge cried, and Porum winced from the sudden noise. Rydia smacked Edge on the back, and he shot Porum an apologetic frown. Porum bit her lip.
He said he was going to kill Cecil. There was a woman there, someone I had never seen before. She was the one who summoned Ramo. Cain told her he would give her the crystal for an audience with Cecil, also that he could kill him with his own hands. You're joking.
Rydia gasped.
Why would Cain be in hiding all this time, only to surface now so he can trade a crystal for Cecil's life?
Edge shook his head.
Ridiculous. That just can't be true. Are we sure the mysterious girl just wasn't playing some sort of dirty trick? I assure you, I'm telling the truth,
Porum glowered, raising her bandaged hand.
This was a little gift from Cain when I dared to question his motives for myself.
Rydia gently pushed Porum's hand back down, shaking her head.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply you were making something up. But now it just begs the question of what purpose Cain has in this mess too. It's obvious that the mysterious girl is obtaining crystals on Baron's behalf, but why would Cain go through her to get to Cecil? They're best friends, or at least they were. Cecil would welcome him back with open arms and no questions. Baron is behind that girl's madness.
Porum gasped.
I thought they had been attacked. A horde of monsters brought down the Red Wings fleet that Prince Theodore was on, killing everyone except for him. Those monsters were headed straight for Baron. Theodore was desperate to get home so he could find Cecil and Rosa. That must have been before he asked Amelia for the waterway key,
Luca frowned.
And if the real Red Wings are dead, it definitely means the ones who attacked my castle were frauds. Did Theodore go back to Baron alone? No,
Porum shook her head.
I couldn't go with him, but I sent 2 mages in my stead. In addition, he had a man with him that I didn't know. Theodore seemed to be safe with him. I didn't ask many questions.
She bit her lip, stifling a sob.
Ah gods, I should have just gone with him. Who knows what danger he's been thrown into because of my negligence. Porum,
Rydia cried, resting her hand on the girl's shuddering shoulders.
If you had gone to Baron, something much worse could have happened in Mysidia. You can't possibly blame yourself for doing what was right at the time.
Porum buried her face in her hands, ignoring the shooting pain exploding out of her bandages.
She needs to rest,
Izayoi said firmly.
None of this excitement is going to help her heal any faster.
Porum slumped underneath Rydia's hand, letting out another pathetic wail.
Theodore is fine, I know he is,
Edge said, rising to his feet.
If he was clever enough to get back to Baron on his own, then I have no doubt he's found a way to keep himself safe. Besides, you said he had someone with him, right? So he's not totally fending for himself. I suppose,
Porum relented, shaking her head. But if Cain is after Cecil, who is to say he wouldn't slay Cecil's son, as well? The poor boy would never see it coming. Cain has never been part of his life. Izayoi crossed her arms, jabbing one manicured nail toward Porum.
You need to get some sleep,
she shot Edge a look, and Rydia watched him recoil with amusement.
And you four have other eidolons to retrieve. She's right,
Edge flushed.
Izayoi is always right when she speaks, that's just a hint for the rest of you for next time she loses her temper so that I don't have to scrape you off the walls later. So? Where to next?
Rydia ignored Edge's attempt at injecting humor into their otherwise pretty damn depressing day, sadly watching as Porum shrunk beneath her covers, her eyes watering as she closed them and turned onto her side with much anguish. She was clenching her teeth as she settled into her new position. Porum had been so battered when they found her that everyone was surprised she could even sit up in bed for as long as she had managed. Izayoi fluttered over to the other side of the bed, straightening the white mage's pillows as she began to drift off. Porum had shoved the hand that was clutching the destroyed rings beneath her pillow, hiding her treasure from sight.
Let's go to Troya,
Rydia said softly.
If Porum is still around, having him here could really help Porum. She's totally devastated. The poor girl has been through so much by herself these past few days, and I can tell she's blaming herself for everything that has happened. Perfect idea,
Lucas squealed, blushing happily.
Rydia, come help me prepare for takeoff. I'll come too,
the man in black volunteered, and the three of them disappeared upstairs, leaving Edge and his men behind with the now passed-out Porum. Edge eyed Tsukinawa as he crept from the corner he had barred himself in ever since Porum had been brought downstairs, tugging his cowl down as he kneeled at the foot of Porum's bed.
Oh, Porum.
Tsukinawa whimpered, lowering his head.
She's gotten herself into such a terrible state.
Izayoi raised her eyebrows, jabbing Edge with her elbow. He sucked air between his teeth, fighting the urge to give her a one-fingered salute until he realized what she was trying to get him to pay attention to. He looked at Tsukinawa's sulky form, then to Porum, and blinked.
Wait. She's the one you...
Tsukinawa glared up at Edge, drawing a finger across his throat. Izayoi snorted, and Edge kneeled down next to Tsukinawa, awkwardly resting his hand on the boy's shoulder.
It's all right. She is far from your average white mage. You know that just as well as I do, right? Yeah.
Tsukinawa shook his head.
But maybe if I stayed in my city a little longer, I could have. Ablin needed you,
Edge said firmly, and Tsukinawa looked up at him.
This won't be the last time you'll have to make a tough decision like that. The road you walk as a ninja is laden with them, unfortunately. I won't say if what you did was right or wrong. But you have to own every decision you make, whether you are a ninja, or a civilian. If you don't, you'll end up driving yourself insane with regret. We live in a world where the door to one path closes when we choose the other, we're not able to run back and change our minds. I know you speak the truth,
Tsukinawa sighed, propping his chin on his hand as he gazed at Porum's still form.
But... I don't know. Don't you ever wish you could go back, and do something over again? Even if you only got one chance at it, and could never reverse another decision for the rest of your life? It might be worth it, if you chose wisely. Yeah.
Edge closed his eyes, the memory rushing over him of diamond dust-laden breath exploding into fireworks inside his chest on a cold winter night. He stood up, giving Tsukinawa a playful flick behind the ear that made the boy jump.
But I don't think any of us would be wise enough to make the right choice if we got a do-over, simply because we're human. So it's probably all for the best, anyway. Yes, Master.
Tsukinawa smiled.
I will keep a watchful eye on her recovery, that's what I can do now, and I'm going to give it my all. Please take care of yourself when we reach Troya. I always do,
Edge smirked.
But let me give you some advice, older women are serious business. They've experienced a lot more of life, and they know what they want and don't put up with anything less. Don't get involved with one unless you're willing to put in the work. I think Rama fried both of your brains,
Izayoi sighed.
Tsukinawa, the last person in the world you should ever get love advice from is your master. Besides, you're not allowed to date until you're 20 anyway, that's your mother's orders. That's just because she doesn't want me to become a young parent like her.
Tsukinawa wriggled his eyebrows.
But I also don't want to be an old maid like you, Izayoi.
Gekao and Zangetsu both had to cling to Izayoi for dear life as Tsukinawa ran for the boiler room to hide, disappearing in a blur of green and purple. Edge nearly collapsed on the floor from tears of laughter, his stomach cramping from the effort not to howl out loud and wake Porum up. In the end, every decision I've made inevitably comes back to this, to see these people, my people, simply living the lives they want without fear. If I can play even a small role in that becoming a reality, I'd do everything the same way all over again, if I ever were made to go back. Even though some of those decisions really, really hurt at the time, and continue to do so. Baron. Father, what is wrong with you? Theodore could feel his heart screaming as Cecil released him without further comment and strode back to the center of the room. Rosa, Sid, and Edward were making no effort to mask their horror. From her position next to the throne, the mysterious girl continued to hungrily bore into Rosa.
Cecil.
Kane lowered his gaze.
There is a lot that you and I need to discuss. I won't deny any of the sins I've lain against you, your family, and Baron. But there's so much more at stake right now. The second moon is a precursor to catastrophe, and the crystals are crying out, they are afraid. Let's you and I team up and fix this together. After that, I promise I'll do whatever you feel needs done to mend what's between the two of us. Even if that means you never want to see me again, I'll heed your request. Kane, no.
Rosa cried, but the mysterious girl suddenly stepped forward, raising her hand.
Speaking of promises, Dragoon, ex-Baron, we two had a promise, if you recall.
Kane glared up at her, and she giggled, tossing her hair behind her shoulder.
Don't look so surprised, just because you got a sparkly new outfit doesn't mean I don't recognize you from the bloodthirsty monster you were before. Must I remind you? The crystals, for an audience with Cecil, I fulfilled my half of the bargain. Let's have the crystals, shall we?
A bolt of lightning ejected from the ceiling, plunging cleanly between Rosa's shoulder blades. Rosa's eyes rolled back as she wordlessly slumped to the floor, the water, wind, and fire crystals lifting out of her hands in a golden bubble and soaring into a portal the mysterious girl had opened next to herself.
Rosa. Mother.
Theodore and Kane ran to Rosa's side, Kane lifting her writhing body against his chest as Theodore whimpered a cure spell. Behind them, Sid was struggling to hold a still injured Edward back from launching himself at the girl, who gave him a small smile in reply to his efforts as she snapped her fingers and closed the portal. Cecil turned toward her, holding out his hand and ignoring Rosa's convulsions.
With this, all of the crystals are back in our grasp.
His fingers curled into a fist, the blue shadows beneath his eyes briefly illuminated by the light of the portal as it faded from their sight.
That's right,
the mysterious girl smiled.
I could have done it without you, but you made my time here interesting, despite your terribly annoying friends. Back, you say?
Kane hissed, relinquishing Rosa to Theodore as he stood, his hand reaching behind him for his lance. Theodore shook his mother gently, her eyes fluttering open as a low moan escaped her throat.
Yes.
Cecil's voice drifted off as the mysterious girl floated to his side, a self-satisfied smug plastered on her face as she gazed up at him.
Cecil.
Rosa coughed, her back hunching as she tried to expel the burning tremors she could feel choking her lungs.
Ugh. The crystals. Why? Don't try to talk.
Theodore whispered, his eyes watering. Why wasn't his father rushing to his mother's defense? Normally, if Rosa even so much as sneezed, Cecil would materialize at her side. They had always seemed to share a bizarre bond that told them when something was wrong with the other. It had used to embarrass Theodore that his family was so embroiled in each other's business, it was just another indication of the alien blood running through his veins, but now the severed connection between the three of them felt as gaping and obvious as a phantom limb.
Stay back, Rosa,
Kane growled, swinging his lance down in the space between Cecil and himself, the tips of the shimmering twin blades hovering over Cecil's chest. Cecil smiled up at him, his hand grazing the hip from which Ragnarok hung. Rydia gazed up at the entrance of Troya Castle despondently, wrapping her arms around herself as she took in the glittering shield of ice that had become encased around the edifice like a crystalline exoskeleton. The doors to the castle had been thrown wide open, with no one in sight. The only sign of life that could be heard was the wailing wind that carried their party's chattering teeth and voices throughout the abandoned castle keep.
It's been completely frozen over,
Edge mused aloud.
I don't suppose that's par for the course here. We're not that far north,
the man in black sighed, pulling his cloak tighter around his exposed chest. Rydia couldn't help but wonder if his feet had simply become completely numb at this point. His toes were pointed into flaking shards of ice.
So I would say no, not normal. Oh, no.
Rydia bit her lip. It seems obvious what has happened here, but I have to check just to make sure.
What is it?
Luca asked, and Rydia shook her head.
I don't want to get ahead of myself. For now, we have to hurry and check on the crystal.
Hurry was the operative word. The marble floors of the castle were also covered in a thick sheet of permafrost, along with everything else, walls, ceilings, massive chandeliers that somehow still had plumes of light pulsing beneath the ice, which resulted in a lot more slipping and sliding than actual purposeful strides. Rydia and Luca linked arms to keep each other steady as they scooted ahead, with Edge and Golbez taking up the rear. Having never been in Troya's castle before, Rydia was amazed by all the imagery of women that surrounded them, beautiful portraits and murals that covered the walls and the domed ceilings of the solarium, relics and jewels from eras gone by encased in locked displays, frozen cascading fountains that featured maidens and warriors alike. It was a refreshing change of decor from every other castle she had been in, which seemingly featured the same boring hard aesthetics and odes to virility. If I ever had a castle, I think I'd like it to be very much like this one, a celebration of the natural wonders of our planet. No wonder the crystal of Earth is ensconced here. She found herself drifting off course over to a group of beautiful statues, all women huddled close to each other, heads lowered conspiratorially, until she realized with muted horror that they were all actual people, frozen solid with a pale blue sheen veiling their panic-filled eyes.
Oh gods!
Rydia gasped, pressing her hand to her chest.
Everyone's been. Palom!
Luca cried, backing away and cupping her hands over her mouth.
If you're here, answer us. Answer us. Answer us.
Us. She lowered her hands as the echo teasingly reverberated around the room, chewing on her lower lip.
Let's go this way,
Edge said, pointing toward a short set of carpeted stairs that lead to another pair of open doors. The doors had at one point been flanked by two middle-aged women in what appeared to be chainmail bikinis, until they had been transformed into human icicles. Rydia and Luca made their way through, followed by the man in black, who had to tug on Edge's arm to get him to come along. After admiring the view, the guards offered for more time than was considered gentlemanly. It was not as much of a shock to Rydia to see the Epops of Troya, sisters of varying ages who looked eerily alike and chose purposely to dress alike, all frozen in various parts of the aisle that bisected the next chamber they had walked into, but she was devastated by the discovery nonetheless. If the Epops had fallen, it was certain that the crystal they had sworn to protect had fallen along with them. To hope for otherwise seemed like an exercise in naivete at this point. But as Rydia took in the depressing scenario before them, she realized that something else seemed off as well. Pressing her lips together, she silently counted the number of bodies scattered down the aisle, and then again for good measure.
Someone is missing,
Rydia announced. The man in black continued further in the room, eyeing a suspicious bejeweled panel on the northernmost wall.
Hey. There are supposed to be 8 Epops. But I'm only counting 7. There have been rumors that the 8th Epop is sick,
Edge said.
And that Troya has been trying to replace her with someone that can wield black magic. Black magic?
Rydia raised an eyebrow.
But I thought the Trojans primarily practiced white magic? Particularly the Epops themselves. Guess they wanted to up the ante in terms of defending the crystal of Earth,
Edge replied, and Rydia looked away, her stomach dropping.
Oh. Of course. Baron. That would explain why Palom was here,
Luca piped up.
If you're going to teach your Epops black magic, you may as well have the most powerful black mage in the world write the lesson plan, right? Well, fat lot of good that did them,
Edge sighed.
Unless someone really pissed Palom off and this is all actually his doing. I highly doubt it,
Rydia frowned.
He's not that evil, I think.
Suddenly, a screeching, grinding sound rang out that made her ears want to spontaneously hemorrhage, and the three of them turned toward the source. The man in black was shoving open a hidden door, the blade slung over his back glistening with chunks of shining ice. With only a slight gesture of his palm, he motioned for them to follow, and then disappeared through the threshold.
Oof, he's gotta be strong to carve through ice like that,
Luca beamed, and Rydia pressed her fingers to her forehead in resignation. Are we over Palom again already? The hidden room had turned out to be the crystal chamber, although the crystal of earth was notably absent, along with any signs of ice or permafrost. It was as if the room had been completely sealed off from the castle's icy curse. You wouldn't have realized anything was amiss until you stepped back outside. Even the temperature of the room was what you would have expected of an early summer day in the Troyan region.
Troya's crystal is gone, too.
Rydia sighed. No surprises here. But I sure wish I knew where it actually went. Did Cain take this one back to Varen too?
It must have been that girl.
Edge shook his head.
As horrible as it might sound, I'm glad Aoi wasn't here for this. Not even she could have escaped that monster. This is all a little overkill just to get a lousy crystal.
Rydia stared at the empty crystal dais, her eyes watering. I'm fairly sure the mysterious girl had help with her little snow sculpture. Luca was stomping around the crystal chamber, peering behind each of the columns and muttering under her breath.
What is it?
Rydia asked, her eyes following the princess as she made a second trip around the room.
Where could he be at a time like this?
Luca scowled.
You mean Palom?
Edge asked, and Luca nodded, crossing her arms over her chest. The man in black watched them from the crystal dais, a faint hint of amusement in his eyes as he ran his fingers through his hair. Rydia shrugged.
Well, remember when the Red Wings were attacking us?
Luca nodded.
Yeah, it's like we told Porum. He was on a black chocobo.
She paused for a moment, chewing on her lip.
Headed due north. The area north of Troya is covered in mountains and forests.
Edge shook his head.
The region is not exactly hospitable to a black mage, even one as powerful as he. At the end of the day, a mage isn't anything special if he runs out of mana, and Palom doesn't strike me as the outdoorsy, survivalist type. Wait.
Luca held up a hand, as if a gesture as simple as that would shut Edge's big mouth.
You're reminding me of something Master Sid mentioned. He spoke of a cave northeast of Troya filled with fearsome monsters, but also really good minerals for airship parts. It's called the Lodestone Cavern. Ever heard of it?
Both Rydia and the man in black shook their heads. Edge grinned.
Care to give it a look? Absolutely.
Luca exclaimed, and Rydia held out her hand.
Now, just wait a moment. You don't sense any eidolons here, do you?
The man in black asked. Rydia shook her head, looking up at him as he hopped down from the crystal dais. Luca and Edge had suddenly become lost in their own plans, the prospect of getting out of the frozen castle vastly appealing to the two of them for entirely different reasons.
No. At least not at the present. Then it might be worth a trip northeast,
he frowned.
An eidolon might have followed your friend, especially if he had something the eidolon wanted.
Rydia nodded, pressing her lips together. It was very strange for them to seemingly be on the same page, but his theory made sense, and Rydia was starting to get the impression that this man understood more about eidolons than any average person. He could tell, just like she, that the ice enveloping the castle was far beyond anything a mere black mage could execute on his or her own, and had noticed how odd it was that the all-encompassing ice had never made its way into the crystal chamber, almost like whoever was responsible for casting the spell had simply turned around and left once they saw the crystal was not there. Palom. Did you actually escape with the crystal? It would be the miracle we so desperately need if you did. The Lodestone Cavern, as Luca had explained on their short journey over, was naturally magnified due to the types of minerals found throughout the island that the cavern was formed on. She also shared that at one point during the war, Sid had made his way to the cavern with Cecil to rescue the crystal of earth from a beast that had further amplified the magnetic field to such an extreme that one could not even walk inside holding a sword without instantly becoming paralyzed in place.
So what are we to do with our weapons?
The man in black had asked.
That monster should be long gone by now. Master Sid and Cecil made quick work of it. If we approach the cavern and start to feel as if we weigh 1,000 pounds, we'll know something even worse is waiting for us. But Sid has been back plenty of times since with no problem.
Happily, Luca had been right on the money. No one had complained of any sudden pains or pressure when they had reached the cavern's entrance. Rydia couldn't help but notice, however, a small collection of abandoned mithril pieces at the mouth of the cave as they shuffled past. One in particular was a curved and exquisitely sculpted silver and amethyst hairpin that looked to be worth a fortune. She gently brushed the dirt of the cavern off of it with her fingertips, her mind immediately jumping back to the young woman she had seen riding the black chocobo along with Palom. That's right. Palom wasn't alone. Who was that with him?
These pieces are so light, why would someone leave them behind?
Rydia asked, and Luca shrugged.
Hard to say. Are we gonna go inside, or are you still treasure hunting?
Geez, Rydia groaned, making a face and tucking the hairpin in her belt for the time being. Even if she never found the owner, she wondered if the man in black would know what kind of protective properties Amethyst had. He seemed to be surprisingly knowledgeable about such things, and she realized she liked having an excuse to talk to him.
When you're motivated, you're all business.
Rydia was fairly sure that Luca had forgotten about the presence of the other girl as well. Or she was very purposely blocking it out. It wasn't much time later that they had reached what appeared to be a dead end. As they had made their descent underground, the percentage of land versus the percentage of empty, depthless ravine seemed to gradually invert. By the time they reached what looked like a rotting, half-collapsing door that had a great deal of the planks torn off, they were surrounded almost entirely by a sea of black, and the very distant lapping of water meeting land could be heard deep, deep below. If the door led to anywhere but a tiny cavern, Rydia had to assume it would have to be on an entirely different plane of existence, because there was no physical possibility of them descending any deeper without plunging into the stale ocean water below.
Let's just put this door out of its misery,
Edge offered, promptly slamming his foot through it. Splintering chunks of wood flew everywhere, Rydia and Luca ducking under the pieces that attempted to assault them. The man in black clenched his jaw, saying nothing even as a chunk of wood bounced off his chest. Inside the next room, the group was shocked to find an exact replica of the crystal chamber in Troya Castle, and for that matter, the crystal chamber in Mysidia too. Unlike Troya, however, this crystal chamber was blanketed in not only several layers of ice, but a fresh coat of powdery white snowfall as well. The crystal dais itself was empty, but collapsed at the base were two frozen stiff bodies, both just barely visible under the new dumping of snow. A wiry young man with long brown hair in a braid that reached past his waist, collapsed face first into the ice, and a young woman in vestal robes with an ash-blonde ponytail spilled over her face, her hand outstretched toward the man with her eyes and lips frozen shut. Her face was contorted in confusion, or quite possibly pain, and a mitre was overturned next to her, frozen to the ground with a petite mound of snow starting to build atop it.
Oh my gods!
Rydia gasped, and Luca fell to her knees before the man, grunting as she lifted him from the ground with every ounce of her strength and flipped him over to his back. She choked out a sob as she delicately ran her fingers over his haphazard bangs and down the slope of his nose to his pursed lips.
Palom! This can't be happening. Not to you too.
Edge first approached the young woman, gingerly reaching down to brush a strand of her hair that had fallen over her eyes, which was of course hard as a rock. He then turned to Palom, whom Luca had now dragged across her lap, tapping his finger to his chin.
Would fire or flame do anything to help him?
Rydia shook her head.
As I suspected back in Troya, this is no ordinary ice covering their bodies. Oh. It is diamond dust,
both Rydia and the man in black said in unison. They looked up at each other sadly, and Edge glanced between the two of them, trying very hard to squash the immature part of him that wanted to reach out and slam the man in black's face into the dais just a few times, you know, just to get some frustration out. Instead, he cleared his throat, gazing back down at Palom's frozen body.
Diamond dust. I thought you might remember. From 15 years ago,
Rydia said softly. Edge blushed deeply, turning away and rubbing the back of his head.
I mean, I do. But that was much prettier and this is much more murderous. Is it really the same thing?
Rydia saw a flash of white out of the corner of her eye. It had been reflected in one of the mirrors that lined the chamber walls. She froze in place, her eyes watering as the velvety glacial blast hit the back of her neck. It delicately drifted around her throat like a mother lovingly wrapping a scarf around her child, and she soon felt it began to squeeze tighter and tighter, the color in her face draining as she reached up and desperately clawed at the air around her neck.
Shiva!
Rydia gasped, and a calamitous scream tore across the crystal chamber, sending showers of ice and snow careening down from the ceilings above, like an avalanche trapped inside of a snow globe. One by one, the mirrored walls of the chamber shattered, fragments of glass melding with the ice and snow as a tempest of arctic wind raced at breakneck speeds to assail them.
Flame!
Edge shouted, a wall of fire wrapping around the six of them just as the blizzard reached the confines of the crystal dais. An explosion of steam hissed to life as fire met ice, the burst of humidity rushing into the chamber ceiling as the now freed glass fragments fell to the ground, their delicate song echoing over the dying roar of the flames as they slid over the ice-coated crystal tiles. Rydia whirled around, the figure of the lithe ice goddess stepping through the curtain of Edge's fire greeting her. Rydia hesitantly took a few steps backwards, wincing as her hips slammed into the crystal dais sooner than she had expected. Shiva stared down at Rydia with dead, coal-blackened eyes, just like Titan's, and just like Rama's, and felt the sinking dread ball up in her stomach once again.
Shiva! It's me, Rydia!
She cried, her numb fingers struggling to grasp hold of her hairpin. Shiva tilted her head, the ice crystals and sapphires woven in hair clinking ominously as she bared her sharpened ivory teeth.
You're wasting your time, Rydia,
Edge said nervously, stepping in front of Luca and Palom to shield them. Luca lowered her head against Palom's chest, her wail carrying into the wind.
Give me back my Palom. I'm trying to buy time.
Rydia gulped, finally yanking the hyacinth out of her hair and grasping it in her hands.
Shiva just wants to get back to normal. I'm sure of it. But there's no light for me to reflect, without the crystal, this chamber is too dark.
The man in black stood before the unknown, frozen girl on the floor, sending out a volley of Fira spells as a middling distraction for Shiva, who was attempting another snow dance and would at least be slowed down by dodging the flames licking her feet.
Can Ramu illuminate the crystal chamber with a lightning bolt?
Of course. Ramu may not want to fight Shiva, but he can at least light our way. Rydia closed her eyes, a warm breeze wrapping around her like a ribbon as she sank to one knee. Her hair fluttered behind her, spiraling into a miniature whirlwind of emerald. If it was Rama's light that worked before against himself, then surely it will work again now.
Ramu! For the bindings of our covenant, I beseech you to come to my aid. Fill this chamber with dazzling light upon my command.
A thunderclap ignited on the dais behind Rydia, and Ramu appeared in a plume of golden smoke, the irises of his eyes faded to white as he raised his hands toward the heavens, summoning forth the familiar maelstrom that had been turned against Rydia just hours earlier. Shiva stared up at Ramu confusedly as the chamber started to shake with the rumble of thunder, and both Edge and the man in black protectively kneeled over their respective charges, their eyes glued to Rydia. Lifting her hairpin in the peripheral of Shiva's glass-like features, Rydia closed her eyes, silently counting to 3 before giving her order.
Now.
A terrific crash detonated in the minuscule amount of space that stood empty between Shiva and Rydia, the blazing light burning through Rydia's clenched eyelids as she struggled to maintain her balance and keep her hands raised in the air. Shiva leapt back with a screech, clawing at her face as the crackling electrical storm reflected off the carved petals of the ruby and burned into her lifeless gaze. The request fulfilled, Ramu disappeared from the dais, and Rydia felt another crash that sent her flying forward. The hyacinth bounced out of her hands, skidding across the floor and landing at Shiva's feet. Rydia dragged herself up from the floor, daring to open her eyes. Her vision was still flooded with glowing spots, but she could at least now tell that the last of Rama's light had dissolved, the cavern was starting to slowly become swallowed in darkness once more. Stumbling forward on her hands and knees, she stretched out her palm to snatch up the hairpin, only to have a cold, periwinkle-manicured hand grasp her own and smash it painfully into the sharp corners of the hyacinth's petals.
Shiva!
Rydia gasped, the ice fairy's grip tightening painfully as her face came into focus. She had fallen to her knees and was hovering over Rydia, her icy breath causing the tears that were seeping out of the summoner's eyes to freeze upon contact.
You? It is you? Rydia?
Shiva asked softly, and Rydia broke into a wide grin, entwining her fingers with Shiva's as she nodded.
Yes, it's me. Shiva, I'm so glad you're back. I missed you terribly. What was I doing?
Shiva shook her head, pressing her free hand to her hair.
I can't remember anything. How did I get here if you did not call me? It doesn't matter,
Rydia said quickly, her heart pounding. Shiva is such a delicate, sensitive soul, if she realizes what happened, she'll drive herself mad with anguish.
Everything is okay now, if you return to the Fame Arch, you'll find Ramu waiting for you. And I'll bring the others back, too, I just need a little more time. You need only say the word, and I'll return to your side once again.
Shiva bowed her head, a solitary tear sliding down her cheek that blossomed into a diamond as it fell from her face.
Thank you, sweet Rydia.
She disappeared in a flash of light, the blanket of diamond dust she had ushered into the crystal chamber fading into the ether. Rydia slumped lower into the floor. Clutching her hairpin, she snapped it back into her hair, letting out a strained breath she hadn't realized she had been holding.
Palom!
Luca exclaimed from behind her. Rydia looked over her shoulder, and saw that Palom was starting to stir in Luca's arms. His eyes fluttered open, the color returning to his face as he suddenly sprung to his feet, thrusting his fist in the air as he barked out a laugh.
Ha! Who said anything about giving up? Give me back the crystal. Palom!
Luca blinked, waving up to him. Palom paused, taking a slow look around the crystal chamber. His eyes first fell to Rydia, then to the man in black, who was kneeling dumbfounded next to the unknown woman, and then he finally swung back around to Edge and Luca, who were both giving him a look that translated into a vulgar expression if spoken aloud.
Hey!
Palom scratched his head.
What are you doing here, Luca? Am I dead, or what? Don't be ridiculous.
Luca sputtered, her face turning red.
You're alive. And so am I, for your information.
Palom shook his head, turning back to the man in black and the young woman, who was also starting to stir. The man in black backed away as Palom bounded over, pulling her outstretched hand into his as he sank to his knees.
Leonora.
So her name is Leonora? Rydia tilted her head. I don't seem to remember Palom or Porum talking about a Leonora before. Is she a new friend of theirs?
Lom.
Leonora gasped, her pretty grey eyes lifting to meet his stare. Rydia watched as their fingers gingerly interlocked, and felt a hot glow rush up her throat. Suddenly, she felt as if she were intruding on something very private, and longed for a black hole to appear that she could hop into. It seemed that the man in black felt the same way. He had immediately averted his gaze, a tinge of pink blossoming on the tops of his ears. Whoa. Maybe friend isn't the right word. She glanced over at Luca, who unlike Rydia and the man in black, could not keep her eyes off of them, and looked as if she were approximately 15 seconds away from having an aneurysm. Rydia couldn't be positive, but she didn't think she had ever seen her friend's skin tone precisely match the hue of her wild red hair in all of their years together, and she had seen Luca get angry about a lot of things.
Don't worry me like that, Leonora.
Palom mumbled, and promptly collapsed next to her, his eyes slamming shut. Leonora's eyes widened, her words hanging in her throat when she lifted her head and realized she had 4 total strangers staring at her.
Palom.
Luca huffed, climbing to her feet and pressing her hand to her mouth. Rydia couldn't make out everything, but was pretty sure the words "you dirty bastard" were uttered.
Where are you from, miss?
Edge asked, extending his hand to Leonora. Leonora stared at him for a few beats, finally gathering the courage to pull her hand away from Palom and offer it to Edge instead.
Troya,
Leonora replied quietly, and Edge hauled her to her feet. She swayed dizzily, grasping his arm and turning so red that Rydia wondered if the poor girl was going to spontaneously combust.
We'll take you back to Troya,
Rydia smiled.
Anywhere in particular? The castle is fine, actually. If it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all,
Edge patted her shoulder.
Should we leave Palom here? Did he kidnap you or something? What?
Leonora bit down on her lip and shook her head.
And no. I'm the one that insisted I go with him.
She pressed her hand to her mouth, whimpering.
Please, don't press any charges against Palom. He didn't do anything wrong. Whoa, calm down, I was just kidding.
Edge laughed nervously.
Anyway. Can't press charges even if I wanted to, you guys are a little outside my jurisdiction.
He shot Rydia a look that said,
what the hell did we get ourselves into? Let's get you two back to Troya.
Rydia tried smiling harder, hoping it came off as genuine, although she had a feeling she was just further creeping Leonora out.
Do you think you can walk, or do you need someone to carry you?
Leonora took one look at Edge, and then turned toward the man in black, who merely rested his hand on his hip. He wasn't smiling at her, but he wasn't glaring, either, which was pretty much as good as it seemed to get with him. Just that act alone was enough to send Leonora into another dithering fit, and she shook her head quickly, her hand sliding to her chest. Rydia wondered if she was trying to keep her heart from jumping out of her lungs.
No, no. I don't want to be a burden. I'll be fine on my own. Well, I'm not carrying the brat,
Edge shrugged, sauntering out of the crystal chamber.
I'll go ahead and make sure there aren't any monsters waiting for us now that Shiva's reign of terror is over.
Luca and Rydia both looked to the man in black, who raised his eyebrows.
Really? Sorry.
Rydia shrugged sheepishly.
We can't leave him here. Porum would kill us.
A cluster of soldiers were waiting at the gate of the defrosted Troya castle when the party made their landing. Rydia was ecstatic to see that everyone looked okay. Like Palom and Leonora, the effects of the diamond dust on the castle and its people had been neutralized after Shiva had returned to the Feymarch. Palom was still passed out in the man in black's arms, and Leonora, as spirited as she was about the attempt to make it home on her own 2 feet, was on the brink of unconsciousness herself. By the time they reached the soldiers, both Rydia and Luca were hoisting Leonora up on their shoulders, the exhausted girl's chin falling to her chest every few moments before suddenly snapping awake.
Leonora! Lord Palom!
One of the soldiers cried, breaking free from the group and rushing up to greet them.
It was rumored you escaped with the Crystal of Earth, are you okay? We'll live,
Leonora said softly, gazing over at Palom. Rydia had to admit that when he was sleeping, he almost looked angelic, but surely by this point, Leonora had spent enough time with him awake to realize what a terror he actually was. Leonora closed her eyes, sighing.
But I fear the crystal is lost. I'm sorry that I failed you.
The soldier fell over herself explaining to Leonora that an apology wasn't necessary, and that she was sure she and Lord Palom had done their best. After a few more minutes of expounding, the soldier finally picked up on Leonora's exhaustion, asking if Rydia and the others would be so kind as to escort Leonora back to her room while she gave the Epops the report of Leonora's return.
That's what we were trying to do in the first place,
Edge groaned once the soldier was out of earshot.
Don't mind her.
Leonora yawned.
I suppose I should start getting used to people wanting to know what I am always up to.
Rydia and Luca exchanged a quizzical look, but said nothing. Leonora's bedchamber was a small, but tidy circular room at the top of an eastern tower that resembled a cloister thanks to the stained glass that made up the majority of the domed ceiling. The walls were lined with curved oak shelving that housed books and artifacts, a small armoire built into one of them that must have housed Leonora's wardrobe. A set of beds were positioned across from each other, both with the same white sheets tucked with military precision and a hand-woven down duvet. Leonora practically threw herself into the bed on the far right, her eyes closing before she could direct them where to put Palom. The man in black unceremoniously dumped Palom in the free bed, brushing his hands as if to formally rid him of any contaminants the black mage might have been carrying. Edge closed the door to the room, pressing back against it as he gazed up at the designs carved into the stained glass. Since there was hardly any light left in the sky, the colors that poured on the floor before them were mostly muted browns and shadows. Luca was sitting on the edge of Palom's bed, the look on her face shifting between unbridled rage and undying devotion depending on what moment you caught her staring at him. She dug into the pouch hanging from her belt, retrieving a vial of phoenix down and popping the cork. As she pressed the glass to his lips, his throat began to clench in response, the color returning to his cheeks. When his eyes slowly slid open, Luca tossed the empty container aside and leaned over his chest, her eyebrows furrowed.
Who's that woman with you, anyway?
Palom blinked, his nose practically touching Luca's. He looked over at Leonora, who had curled up into a ball, one of her arms hanging over the side of the bed as her chest rose and fell steadily.
Her.
Luca nodded, and Palom gave Luca a hard shove on the shoulder, pushing her off of him.
She's my partner.
Luca's eyes widened in confusion, and Leonora chimed in from the bed, her eyes still closed. Apparently, she wasn't as asleep as everyone had thought.
And my name is Leonora. It's an honor to meet all of you. I'm Troy's newest Epopt, informally, anyway. I suppose I haven't been properly initiated yet.
Everyone in the room gave their introductions, with the exception of the man in black, who merely nodded. Rydia turned to Palom, who had swung his legs over the side of the bed.
Palom, there is something you should know. The elder of my city is in critical condition as we speak. What?
Palom interrupted, jumping up.
Then I can't just sit around here.
He winced as he took a step forward, suddenly falling to one knee and cursing under his breath.
Arg. It feels like my legs are still numb. You can't leave. Not yet.
Luca pouted, and Palom glared up at her from the floor.
Nobody asked you. What's going to happen to my Cydia if I'm not there for them? That's my home, you know. Palom.
Rydia snapped, and Edge stepped away from the door, reaching down and yanking Palom to his feet with one swift motion. Still clutching Palem's coat, he leaned in, tugging down his cowl.
Calm down. Luca's just concerned for you, there's no reason to get angry at her for that. You haven't heard the whole story yet, and believe me, we have plenty more that you're going to want to save your outrage for. The Elder has a team of white mages caring for him, he will be okay. Come to the Falcon with us. Porum's on board, too, she'll want to see you.
Palom reddened, his eyes flickering briefly at the mention of his twin sister's name. Porum. She managed to escape whatever got the Elder? Thank the gods for small favors.
Heh. Who died and made you my master?
Edge shrugged, dropping Palem's coat and giving him a little shove. It was more than enough to overwhelm Palem's still weakened body, and he flopped back onto the bed pathetically.
If you don't like it, then rest up until you can fight on your own.
Palom smirked.
No problem. That's exactly what I'm going to do, thank you very much. I hope the Falcon has nice accommodations.
Edge pressed his fingers to his forehead, groaning. Oh, brother. He's exactly as I was, once upon a time. Leonora sat up on her bed, pushing her hair out of her sleepy eyes.
I want to come with you.
Palom tilted his head, crossing his arms over his chest.
Now, look. Letting you come along to defend the Crystal of Earth was one thing. It was super cool when you gave that witch the beat down with that wooden board, but it was also super reckless. You saw that.
Leonora smiled, and Palom blushed deeper, remembering Leonora's shriek as she had barreled into the crystal chamber and slammed the board across the mysterious girl's skull.
Don't you touch Palom. Yeah. I mean, I was petrified, not dead. Well, we're not done yet, are we?
Leonora tapped her finger to her cheek.
You haven't finished teaching me all the magic you know. Ha. Good point.
Palom grinned.
Okay, you're on. Welcome to the team. This is not your team to welcome anyone to.
Edge snapped, and Leonora giggled behind her sleeve.
Oh Palom, you have such spirited friends, I'm really looking forward to getting to know all of you better.
Palom smirked as he stood up, relinquishing his seat on the bed and tossing Edge a haughty glance as he walked over to Leonora, already barking orders to her about what she should pack. Luca was staring at her knees, dumbfounded, her eyes narrowed into watery slits. Rydia took Palem's place on the bed, sliding her arm around Luca's shoulders and giving her a tight squeeze.
Hey. Are you alright?
Rydia whispered. She exhaled deeply, not believing what she was going to say next.
I don't think he meant to be so nasty. He's probably still in shock about losing the crystal.
Luca rubbed her cheek, shaking her head.
Yeah, I'm alright. Too much excitement. Not enough sleep. It's all starting to get to me now. It's slowly sinking in. We're in a lot of trouble, hey.
Rydia squeezed again, leaning in closer.
Yeah. We are. But I couldn't ask to be in trouble with a better group of friends. If it weren't for you guys, I wouldn't already have 2 Eidolons back. I'm still kind of in disbelief that you're all willing to help me like this. I fear it's only going to get harder.
Luca cracked a smile.
Idiot. You did so much for us 17 years ago, more than we'll ever be able to repay you for. This is the least we can do. I'm not going to let anything, or anyone, get in the way of helping you get your family back.
Luca's eyes fell on Palom as she spoke, whose back was turned to her. Leonora was reaching up from the bed, handing him something that had been wrapped around her neck, a green and white scarf, it looked like. A fresh wave of tears sprung to her eyes, and Rydia pulled her closer, tucking her head against her chest.
Luca. I'll be fine.
Luca sniveled, closing her eyes as she drank in the sharp, clean notes of Rydia's hair, still tinged with a mix of mist and diamond dust.
Honestly, I'm just happy he's alive, standing among us just like this. There's no need to ask for anything more right now.
End of chapter.